time for a night at the opera.
Scaramouche, will you do the fandango?
No, not that opera. Today we are ranking the albums of Fleshgod Apocalypse, starting with Oracles in 2009. Pretty standard sort of technical death metal at this point for them. They hadn't fully blossomed into the symphonic death metal that they would become known for. I know some actually prefer this early work just for that reason. They are heavier and more focused with the proficient guitar work, but by 2009 we'd already had so much of that I'm just not that interested in more. So enjoyable stuff, but just not what I come to the band for. Like there's so many other groups, like, I mean, going back to stuff like Suffocation that I could go to for that more simple kind of old school technical death metal style. So this one is going to good tier. We're also going to include Mafia in 2010. I don't normally put EPs on these lists, but sometimes I do if they're important, and I think this one is actually pretty important to them since it's a somewhat transitional one. Still more emphasis on the tech death at this point, but starting to toy with more neoclassical sounds in the guitars, as well as Paolo really stepping up the operatic clean vocals in certain places. Some really great moments, but the songwriting still feels a bit clunky, and we haven't acclimated the orchestral elements, though we do get a bit of a teaser for that in the outro. Better than the debut and cool At the Gates cover, but still just not hitting the sweet spot for me just yet. I know there's some people in Discord who really enjoy this record. I just think the songs also kind of drag on too long for what they are. Like, there's just not enough meat to them. Again, in comparison to some of the later albums where the longer songs are really going to get carried by a lot of different stuff. So this one also went to good for me. But next up we have Agony in 2011. Now this feels like the true start of the band for me. You lose a lot of the guitar work, but we gain so much on the symphonic level and operatic elements. They give Dimmu Borgir a run for their money. Some absolutely killer tracks here, like The Violation, The Egoism, The Deceit, and The Oppression being among my favorites. Killer songwriting, but I will say that this won't be the last time you hear me complain a bit about the production. It seems pretty clear that with how dense this instrumentation is, they weren't exactly sure how to fit it all in at this kind of still somewhat amateur stage in their development. Everything just feels like it's really fighting for space in the mix, and I remember as a result it took me a few listens to really pick up on all the little touches. The guitar tone is a little bit funky too, but honestly, it sort of adds to the charm. Like, sometimes these more objective measures aren't really everything in spite of all of the issues. This continues to be one of my favorites. It's just such an interesting twist on the genre that, while coming after black metal acts like Dimmu Borgir, still manages to make its own twist on the extreme symphonic music genre and in a more kind of death metal way. We also have stuff like Septic Flesh, but I feel like that's a little bit more kind of like grandiose and a little bit even like classy than this, whereas this is just like balls to the wall mayhem. So yeah, this is one of my favorites still. It is going to perfection. There's always that person in the comments who's like, well, didn't you just describe all the reasons that it's not a perfect album? And to them I say, bro, it's not that deep. Like, that's just the word that I use for the top. It's not supposed to be like, yes, this album is perfect. I don't think there are many like truly perfect albums, but yeah, it's one of my favorite Fleshgod Apocalypse records. Next up we have Labyrinth in 2013. Now, speaking of dense, this album makes the last one look like styrofoam. It feels like they really stepped up the chaos of the instrumentation, but still with similar production issues, and it's just a shame to hear all of these cool orchestral parts get kind of squashed together like Kevin Bacon in a car crusher. So much going on, and it can be really hard to appreciate all of it without re-listening a lot and having to strain your ears a bit. That said, I would love a re-recording because, once more, there are plenty of amazing songs to love here, like Kingborn, Elegy, War Pledge, and Pathfinder. Very impressively written and performed, and with such an unrelenting energy and clear passion. Epilogue also feels like a taste of the more dynamic directions to come. Criticisms aside, again, it's still very impressive, and I own a physical copy if that says anything. Spin it enough times and I think your ears and brain will start to adjust, because I feel like that's what happened to me. At first it was just like this amorphous blob of loud nonsense, but over time, even going back to it this most recent time for this list, I was like, oh, actually, this kind of makes more sense than I remember it doing at the first time I got to it. I think a lot of music is like that too. Even like early black metal was like that for me too. So this one too, fantastic. Next up is King in 2016. Now, I actually did not like this album much at all when it came out, but it's grown on me quite a bit. On the one hand, I respect it because this represents the band really improving on the production with their first where everything really comes through. But on the other hand, it's quite a bit slower and more sparse. It just lacks a lot of the energy and chaos of the previous two that I enjoyed. So you end up with this album that sounds fantastic and lets the best moments shine, more like sing-along moments too, but I also find myself a little bored in places like Cold as Perfection, Syphilis, and Gravity. Love the big intro and then those choral elements and syncopated vocals on In Aeternum. The Fool makes for a standout single, especially with that incredible harpsichord, one of the faster songs here too. Nice chuggy parts and more death metal emphasis on A Million Deaths. This would also be the last album with Tommaso Riccardi on vocals and guitar. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot more again now than I did back then, but I think if you're more of like a doom metal fan, which most of you know I'm not really, I think you'll probably like this one a lot more. I feel like Quest for Metal, this is maybe one of its favorites if I'm remembering accurately, but I'm forgetting right now. But regardless, for me, it's going to great. Then we got Veleno in 2019. Big changeovers in the lineup here, which especially for a band like this could be a disaster, but they really still managed to step things up, taking the lessons they learned from the last album and more dynamic songwriting and production while adding back the speed and heaviness that I felt was lacking. Even more great sing-along moments here and lots of great hooks while also keeping things pretty complex, and unlike the earlier records where the songs start to run together, every track here has its own personality. Opening strong with the appropriately titled Fury, providing just that in the chaotic piano and start-stop riffs. Big dramatic opening on Carnivorous Lamb, giving me Cradle of Filth and Dimmu Borgir vibes, lots of ups and downs to this one. Sugar is one of their best singles ever by far, with just those dizzying pianos and guitars, and even with those backing choral elements, once more, every note rings through perfectly. Then there's that chuggy part with once more the kind of Cradle of Filth lead guitar sound, and alongside those push, push, push vocals. More massive brass and choir for Absinthe, making for another incredible single, and then Pissing on the Score is also easily in my top 10 tracks for them, just bringing everything together for one incredible composition. I will say that there are parts where Paolo struggles to hit some of the higher notes for the operatic parts, but that's more of a nitpick, I would say, overall. Still especially impressive for a three-piece band. At this point, it is going to perfection. Before we get to the last album, just a reminder as always to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video, or dislike if you dislike, and also comment your own rankings, because again, this is just my opinion and everybody has a different one. But next up we have Opera in 2024. Paolo is no longer present on this album, with the operatics now fully handled for the first time by female vocalist Veronica Bordaccini. I was a little skeptical about this after hearing I Can Never Die as a single, but honestly, this is probably my least favorite song on the album and is still quite good, but it just gets so much better from there. Pendulum is another fantastic track with a little bit of everything from an appropriately pendulum-like hypnotic groove, Carnegie Hall-worthy operatics, and a killer mix of technical and neoclassical guitar work that is just, delicious.
Nice.
At War With My Soul has an intro that rivals O Fortuna, and I also love the kind of half-spoken, half-sung interlude towards the end. This feels like a much more successful attempt at one of the slower tracks off of King. Morphine Waltz was another instant favorite between the frantic female vocals and bashing of the piano keys like Daffy and Donald dueling each other in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Another great dueling guitar solo, too. Blood Clock lures you in with its peaceful harp intro before getting super heavy and absolutely epic at the same time. I'm not sure if the title is a Death Clock reference or just a coincidence, but I dig it either way. Another more operatically focused track in Matricide 821, digging the big building of the atmosphere and those snare rolls. This is some Phantom of the Opera sounding shit. More great interplay of the piano, strings, and various layers of vocals on another personal favorite in Per Aspera ad Astra. And then closing on another dramatic note with Till Death Do Us Part and the outro. Definitely continuing with the best elements of the last record, but the changes in sound are also notable. I'm not sure I love it as much as Veleno as a whole, but it is very close and I appreciate the tighter runtime. I'm interested to see where the band continues to evolve to in the future. At this time though, I'm going to put Opera at fantastic. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings or this video for whatever your personal YouTube recommendation is, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.